If you're new to this channel, you're probably wondering, how's this young guy who looks nothing like a spiritual teacher going to teach me about reincarnation and karma? I was really fortunate that I came to meditation at the age of 6. I met my teacher at the age of 6 at a martial arts club, and he was a lifelong meditation practitioner and spiritual teacher. He only had a small group of students, and he chose to live a very quiet life and not sort of develop and bring publicity into his life. So he decided to basically teach the people around him. I was one of them, and I've been one of his students for over 20 years. Karma. You hear so much nowadays about the importance of being present and the power of the present moment. And that's because everything that we are experiencing in the present is a result of our past and previous actions. So all of our actions that we are doing now in the present moment will create our future. So the present moment is super important. It contains the past and the future. There is a pivotal point of karma. Everyone knows the basics of karma, which is whatever I put out, I receive. And that's because there's a universal law that was put in place when we were given free will. We were given free will and free choice over what we could do. But with that free will, we were also given the universal law of karma, which means that whatever we put out, we receive in equal measure. So it's to our own benefit to be good people, because if the better we are, the more good returns to us. And it's a very simple law. The books are perfectly balanced, and no one escapes karma. There's no one that's outside of that law. A simple aspect of karma that is often overlooked or maybe not quite understood is that there's a very pivotal point of karma. And that pivotal point of karma is our intent. So not every action will incur karma, but be it skillful or non-skillful karma. It's only when there's an intent that we start to then incur karma. So if we were to do something really charitable, but we did it with the intent of, I want to gain, then that is then a kind of a negative act. It loses its purity at least. Whereas if I do a charitable work with the pure intent of just giving without any want of anything in return, that's a very pure act. My intent is really good, it's pure, and so I will receive that to the extent that I gave it out. An analogy would be if I was driving along in my car and a cyclist pulled out in front of me, and I swerved to avoid the cyclist, but I hit another car head on and killed the driver of that car. I wouldn't then be incurring karma because my intent was to avoid hitting the cyclist. So the pivotal point of this situation is intent. Whereas if I was driving along and a cyclist pulled out in front of me and I accelerated and tried to run the cyclist over, and I did, and I injured or killed the cyclist, then my intent was to harm that cyclist. So I would then incur karma in that situation. So the pivotal point of our actions is dependent on our intent. And so we want to try to make sure that everything we do is with good intent. Lots of people wonder why there's so much suffering in the world. And the likelihood is that we've got lots of karma to pay off. We've probably been awful in past lives. We may have had 10, 20, 100, 500 or more lives. We don't know. And throughout all of those times in history, we could have been awful people. And we often think of ourselves as the personality that we are now. But we've got to remember that in a spiritual context, we are a spirit. And that spirit was embodied in a totally different body, in a totally different personality, in a totally different time in history, and with totally different surroundings and circumstances. So the karma that we created isn't a reflection of the person that we are now, but we do have to pay off that karma. So quite often people will say, oh, it must have been awful, and they associate the karma that they're facing now as being them, the personality. And sometimes we see people who appear to be beautiful people, really nice people, and they have awful things happen to them, and we think, how could they possibly have negative karma? They're incredible people. But we're not taking into account the fact that we're judging them as the person they are now. We are associating them as being the personality, the person who they are that we see in front of us. But actually they're not that. They are the spirit that is embodied in that person, was probably embodied in totally different personalities in previous lives. This isn't for us to worry about. We don't know if we have any negative karma or to what extent that negative karma is, All we can do is make sure that our intent and our actions in the present moment now are as good as they can be. I was always taught by my teacher that it's very beneficial to develop a connection with God or the divine or the universe, whatever you believe in, because the closer that we get to that source, we can be relieved of some karma. The best way to look at karma when you're going through a really difficult period in your life is to see it as a gift. Normally these moments are dropped into our life at the perfect time as a means of redirecting us. Often we are going off track, or we need to look within ourselves more deeply, and the suffering that we face, but based on previous karma, but given to us at a very good time normally, helps us to develop, helps us to grow, helps us to look more inward. So see all of your suffering as a gift. It's really hard to do. It's a very hard way of looking at suffering, but if you can, it can transform suffering into a learning mechanism, a period of time in your life when you can learn and grow. Reincarnation. So reincarnation is essentially our spirit passing from one body to the next. So when I die, when my physical body dies, my spirit form will actually go up to a plane that's called the astral plane, and it will rest there for a certain period of time until circumstances are correct for me to then reincarnate into another physical form, another family, and go through a life there. And then depending on my desires and my karma, that will determine whether I pass over again and spend some time and then reincarnate into another body, or whether I progress into higher planes of existence. This is what's called the wheel of birth and rebirth. This is where we live in a physical body and we create lots of karma, lots of negative karma specifically, and we have to then re-embody into another form to pay that karma off. And we find ourselves in this cycle of birth and death, and not breaking out of this cycle. It's not until we take our attention away from the material world and start to open up to a more spiritual outlook and direct all of our desires to wanting to understand the truth behind this physical reality and understand and gain knowledge of God or the universe or consciousness. It's not until we start thinking of these topics and desiring to know more of the spiritual world that we can even think about breaking free of this cycle of birth and death. Our desires play a real crucial role in this cycle of birth and death, because as human beings, we're so powerful mentally that whatever we actually want, whether we direct our attention single-mindedly to trying to gain a physical object or trying to manifest one thing or another, eventually, when we put in the right effort and energy and action, we can manifest that. So what's happened at the moment is that we are all directing our attention and energy and action towards gathering and gaining material objects, or gaining more money, bigger house, bigger car, faster car. So all of our aspirations, all of our desires are for this material world. And so we keep returning to this material world because we are desiring things within it. And it's not until we break free of that outlook and start to develop a more spiritual outlook and want to understand spiritual topics more and understand what's behind this reality, that we can start to let go of our desires for more material objects and more pleasure from the physical world, and we can start broadening our horizons and look to a more spiritual way of life. When we do this and we start behaving in a better way, we start paying off our negative karma, we develop a closeness to the divine or the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, and we start understanding more spiritual concepts and spiritual laws like karma and reincarnation. When this starts to happen, we're getting closer to being able to break off of this cycle of birth and death. And this sounds like a real far-fetched point to make, but I just want to make it clear that I've got experience of this because I've had experiences in meditation. If anyone's watched my videos before, they'll hear me speak about this, but I've had experiences where I've come out of my body in meditations and literally left my body and gone into a higher state of consciousness, and it was super real, super realistic, and it gave me proper knowing that there is other levels. I knew when that happened, I knew for certain that we weren't physical, we were actually beings of light, like I thought we were. But it's very hard for me to ever explain this in a way. It was so much beyond words that it's hard to put together in a sentence half the time. We've all got the gift of free will, and it's up to us whether we want to keep wanting things within this realm and getting things within this physical plane, or whether we want to look at and broaden our horizons and look to the spiritual and start to develop and draw that into our life. And that's within our power. We have free will, so it's up to us to what we do with that free will. I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about things that are on my mind. It's all related to spirituality and meditation. It might be my own experiences, it might be things that have come up that week, things I've read, or it could be teachings that I just feel like sharing in the moment. So do subscribe to my newsletter. I'll put a link in the description. Be sure to subscribe. A previous video that I made talked about 3 important questions that any spiritual aspirant should ask themselves. And the answer to the question helps you to have a direction with your own spiritual journey. And I think this video will really help you. If this particular video now is of interest to you, it might help you to understand it a little bit deeper. I'll post that video up here. Please do have a look at that if that's of interest. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please do like the video, follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe for more.